Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Later today, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan will meet Theresa May in Downing Street as part of his three-day visit to the UK. President Erdogan, who is in the middle of a domestic election campaign, says the Anglo-Turkish relationship is growing in importance and is set to develop even more after Brexit. But the visit has sparked criticism from numerous voices here in the UK. Greg Dawson has been speaking to protesters outside Downing Street.
Well, this is just a flavour of the reception that President Erdogan can expect when his motorcade spins into Downing Street later this afternoon. There's currently around about 50 or so protesters here at the gates of Downing Street, but those numbers are expected to swell significantly later in the afternoon. I'm joined here by two of those protesters, Antonia Byatt and John McGregor, both members of the English Pen campaign group. You campaign for writers' freedom around the world, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right, and we're here to ask Theresa May to raise the issues around freedom of expression in Turkey. Over 85 media organisations have been shut down, 30 publishing houses, and the journalists have been sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for doing their job. That's really shocking and not acceptable.
The reason President Erdogan is here, John, is to discuss things like trade. There's an important relationship there between the UK and Turkey, and especially with Brexit on the horizon. Security is obviously an issue, with Turkey sharing a border with Iraq and Syria. Do you see the reason for Theresa May extending this welcome then to President Erdogan?
It seems to me the reason is that Britain is desperate to form new trading partnerships because we're turning our back on the EU, and if that means turning our back on democracy and human rights and things that this country has always stood up for and believed in, and I think that's a terrible shame.
Isn't it the fact that if President Erdogan is face-to-face with Theresa May, then she can raise those human rights concerns, which is a far better way of doing it than perhaps with a simple phone call and, angry messages?
Well, as long as she does raise them, and there isn't enough evidence that she has raised them today, and that's why we're here to say it is incredibly important to raise those issues, and you can't do business unless you are sure you're dealing with a nation that has the same democratic values that we do.
Now, the UK government has stressed that yes, Turkey is an important ally, but it won't shy away from raising those issues of human rights, but it will be done so in private.
Greg Dawson. Well, I'm joined now by Turkey's Economy Minister Nihat Zerbeci. Welcome to the Daily Politics. This trip, obviously, that has been organised, and this visit has been about boosting economic ties and links with Great Britain. But do you accept that that's been completely overshadowed by your country's human rights record?
I mean, the UK when we see the Turkey in the region, I mean, during these conversations, the interviews, they were saying Turkey has a border with Syria and Iraq. In 2016, the coup attempt in Turkey, all terrorist organizations still around the Turkey and trying to be in Turkey, trying to attack the Turkey. Okay, of course, Turkey wants to be in a normal position. We really would like to be in the normal conditions, like any other countries living in the middle of Europe.
Sure, but
for a short term, because of the many reasons, many terrorist reasons, many attacks, many a kind of fire around the Turkey. We have some kind of regulations in Turkey.
But are they regulations? I mean, you've been accused of locking thousands of people up, including hundreds of journalists who disagree with the regime.
We don't accept it because Turkey is very open. Turkey is the member of NATO. Turkey have very strong ties with Europe. They have very strong ties with the international human rights organizations.
But except you have denied permission to the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture, who has wanted to look and investigate torture allegations following that coup attempt that you mentioned. Are you open?
We are open.
But why haven't you allowed this European Committee?
We are open all kind of, witnessing all kind of things, people in Turkey. But, you know, when you say the journalists in the prison, there are journalists. Some of them can be the journalists, but they had collaboration. They had very strong ties with all the terrorist organizations. But these are the days we really would like to pass very fast in Turkey.
All right, so let's talk about the economic ties that you would like to strengthen, which I know is, obviously, you are as the economy minister. Talk to us a little bit about your relationship with the EU, the customs union that you have. What are the good things about that, and what are the things that don't work?
Since 21 years, we have customs union relation with the European Union, signed in 1995 and implemented in 1996. When we start this customs union relation with the European Union, the aim or the target was, it was a preparation for Turkey to be the full member of the European Union.
Which hasn't happened.
That didn't happen. And then at that time, the parties, bilateral, the Turkey and the European Union said, okay, in year 2000, Turkey is going to be the full member of the European Union. Then we need to create a kind of mechanism. It's going to help the Turkish economy to prepare this full membership. That's why, as a Turkish side, we didn't think about this. We didn't check everything, but with the details, we accepted and we signed. And
do you think it would be a good model for the UK to have a similar arrangement with the EU? Not this one. Why not?
Not this one, because it is, as an independent country, this kind of agreements we shouldn't accept. But as a proper one, bilateral, the balanced agreement, of course, is good, as a customs union. Now, with Turkey and European Union, we are negotiating, upgrading the customs union, because there are something. Turkey is not the mechanism, is not in the mechanism of decision-making between Turkey and European Union.
So you have to take rules that you have no involvement in?
No involvement. And the second thing is the European Union is signing free trade agreements with the third parties, with the third countries like Mexico, Algeria, or South Africa, or any other countries, or TTIP, for example. And these agreements, the third parties, these other countries, they are having the license, they are having the permission, they are having right to enter the Turkish market. Turkey doesn't have.
Right. And so this you don't think would be a good model for the UK, as the Prime Minister is talking about?
I'm not saying this, because I'm afraid of being misunderstood. This model of Turkey is not a balanced agreement. That's why we are trying to upgrade this. We are trying to make it proper one. But the model now we are negotiating with the European Union, upgraded and finalized. Of course, it's good for the UK.
OK, well, all right, so you think the upgraded version would be good for the UK. What about Turkey's relationship with post-Brexit Britain? Do you think that can flourish, that relationship?
I see it as a chance, as an opportunity between Turkey and the United Kingdom, because the Turkey and United Kingdom is very complementary countries.
In what way?
Each other. We are not competing countries. We are, whatever we have, UK doesn't have it. Whatever the UK has, we don't have it. That's why we can collaborate, we can cooperate, we can put our companies or institutions to cooperate even in UK, in Turkey, in the third countries.
Yes.
This is very important.
Polly, what do you think? There will be people who say we shouldn't be intensifying links with a country like Turkey because it has a human rights record that needs to be looked at and investigated. On the other hand, it's a perfect post-Brexit partner in terms of trade and economics.
Well, it's one of the sort of devastating things about Brexit is that we've got a bit desperate for partners. Is it desperate to build a partnership with Turkey? We're having to lower our standards. I think it's devastating what's happened to Turkey, which was a beacon of a democratic, secular, but a Muslim country. I think that was a fantastic thing for the world. And what's happened over the course of several years now is that it has become an increasingly Islamist, increasingly a dictatorship, and increasingly repressive.
And would you like Turkey to be part of the EU at any stage?
I would like Turkey to get back on track to being a secular democratic country, which is on track to be part of the European Union, but we're a million miles from that at the moment.
What do you say?
Turkey is a secular and democratic country. But, you know, when you compare the Turkey with these standards, while you are in the middle of Europe, it is not fair. I mean, standard doesn't change. I accept this. But the realities are around the Turkey is forcing the Turkey. We would like to be part of European Union.
All right.
We would like to be part of modern democracy, human rights, and all kind of environmental standards. We would like to be there.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
But first, let's take you to number 10. And finally hear from the Prime Minister and also the President of Turkey.
President Erdogan, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to Downing Street today. The UK-Turkey relationship is indispensable. The issues we have discussed underline just how important it is that we work ever more closely together to make our people safer and more prosperous. But I'd like to start by addressing the troubling situation in Gaza and the West Bank, which President Erdogan and I have discussed today. The loss of life we have seen is tragic and extremely concerning. Such violence is destructive to peace efforts, and we call on all sides to show restraint. There is an urgent need to establish the facts of what happened yesterday through an independent and transparent investigation, including why such a volume of live fire was used and what role Hamas played in events. Palestinians have the right to protest, but these protests must be peaceful. We are concerned that extremist elements are seeking to hijack legitimate protests to further their own objectives. And while we do not question the right of Israel to defend its borders, the use of live fire and the resulting loss of life is deeply troubling. We urge Israel to show restraint. It is in everyone's interest for peace and stability to prevail in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. The discussions we have had today have covered the breadth and depth of our relationship. Allow me to say a few words on each of the key topics we've discussed. Firstly, we are NATO allies and remain firmly committed to the alliance as the best way of guaranteeing our collective security. Since my visit to Ankara in January last year, both Turkey and the UK have suffered grievous attacks by terrorists. As Daesh is defeated militarily, we are aware of the risk of foreign fighters dispersing from Syria and Iraq. To counter this, we have today agreed to take concrete steps towards measures that will formalise our information sharing. Our intent is to agree that when Turkish authorities return a British citizen suspected of terrorist offences to Britain, they will do so with vital evidence such as media taken from mobile devices and transcripts of interviews. This will support our efforts to secure the convictions of those who seek to do us harm. We have also reaffirmed our commitment to deepen cooperation between the Home Office and the Turkish Ministry of the Interior. This commitment means that we will look at how our police, border, customs and Coast Guard agencies can share information more easily in order to tackle the terrorists and organised criminals involved in money laundering, drug smuggling and people and arms trafficking. Turkey is on the front line of many vital issues for the UK, particularly in Syria, where it is an important member of the global coalition against Daesh. Today, President Erdogan and I have reaffirmed our commitment to defeating Daesh and the need for a political settlement to end the war and provide stability for all of Syria, Turkey and the wider region. We also agreed on the need to ensure humanitarian access in Syria and on the importance of compliance with international humanitarian law and the protection of civilians by all sides. We reiterated our condemnation of the terrible chemical weapons attacks in Douma and on the streets of Salisbury. And while clearly the two incidents differ in order of magnitude, they are part of a pattern of disregard for the global norms that prohibit the use of chemical weapons. Today, President Erdogan and I agreed on the importance of restoring the international norm that the use of chemical weapons is abhorrent and can never be acceptable. I underlined once again the UK position that the Salisbury attack was not just an act of attempted murder in Salisbury, nor just an act against the UK by Russia. It was an affront to the rules-based system on which we all depend. The conflict in Syria has led to the displacement of millions of people, both within Syria and beyond. I pay tribute to Turkey's extraordinary generosity in hosting more than 3.5 million Syrian refugees and educating more than 600,000 Syrian children. We recognise the enormous effort that the Turkish authorities are making to give those refugees the help they need. In total, the UK has committed more than £750 million, both bilaterally and through the EU budget to the Facility for Refugees in Turkey, in order to support those efforts. And during this visit, the UK and Turkey have agreed high-level talks between our countries to build capacity in the region and reduce the flow of migrants. The importance of the UK-Turkey partnership is also demonstrated by our growing trade relationship. Trade between the UK and Turkey has increased by more than 50% over the past decade and is now worth more than £15 billion. We continue to build on this and look to our future trade relationship once the UK leaves the EU. During my visit to Ankara in 2017, we agreed to establish a trade working group to explore ways to liberalise and increase trade between the UK and Turkey. Our officials continue to work together to build a solid foundation on which our relationship can flourish. During my visit to Turkey, BAE Systems and TAI also agreed to collaborate on the pre-design phase of Turkey's new TFX fighter jet, which resulted in a contract worth more than £100 million being signed in August 2017. This was the start of a deep and enduring defence partnership, including a new and unique government-to-government agreement that set a new framework for cooperation and dialogue, including between our defence ministries and air forces. And today we have discussed the next phase of this project, Rolls-Royce's bid to co-design the engine for the TFX fighter. This would support the development of aerospace engineering capability and jobs in the UK and Turkey, and we look forward to continuing discussions. Finally, the UK stood with the Turkish people when its democracy came under attack in July 2016. It is right that those who sought to overthrow the democratically elected government are brought to justice. But it is also important that in the defence of democracy, which has been facing extraordinary pressures from the failed coup, instability across the border from Syria and from Kurdish terrorism, Turkey does not lose sight of the values it is seeking to defend. And that is why today I have underlined to President Erdogan that we want to see democratic values and international human rights obligations upheld. Throughout this process and in the face of the shared challenges ahead, the UK will remain a true friend to Turkey. So, President Erdogan, once again, thank you for your visit and for such productive talks. Please.
Your Excellency, Madam Prime Minister, distinguished ministers, distinguished members of the press, I would like to salute you all with my most heartfelt emotions and respect. First and foremost, I would like to take this opportunity in your presence to thank Madam Prime Minister May for showing a very generous welcome to myself and my delegation. Our ally, our strategic partner, and our friend, the UK. It gives me great pleasure to be able to make this official visit here. As you are aware, Turkey is on the verge of early elections, which will be held on the 24th of June. Despite a very hectic schedule before the elections, we are attaching great significance to our relations with the UK. That's why we have prioritized paying this visit to the UK. The UK and our friends in the UK showed the utmost solidarity with us, especially in the aftermath of the failed coup of July the 15th, where we have lost 251 civilians and only 5 days later, the failed coup. At the level of ministers, the UK showed great solidarity and paid a visit to our country. That is always very valuable for us. This afternoon we got together with Her Majesty the Queen, and a couple of minutes ago we got together with Madam Prime Minister May, where we had the opportunity to discuss our relations at every extent possible. We have prioritized our efforts in order to further profound our relations post-Brexit and preserve the outstanding relations that we have come to enjoy. Madam Prime Minister paid a visit to Turkey in January 2017, and we had forged a trade and investment study group, which is quite functional. And at the same time, we welcome the agreement reached between the EU and the UK while transitioning to the Brexit and for the post-Brexit period. The UK stands to be our second export market in Europe. We are housing pleasantly more than 3,000 British companies in Turkey, and in the year 2017 the trade volume between our countries reached $16 billion, give or take. However, we have both agreed with Madam Prime Minister that our potential is not directly reflected with this trade volume. We have the eventual goal of reaching a trade volume of $20 billion. God willing, with the joint steps forward, we will accomplish this target. Both countries will be capable of designing and manufacturing value-added products together and at the same time benefit from the opportunities that avail themselves in third countries. Today, Turkish and English companies are cooperating in the TFX project, which is the national combatant jet of the fifth generation. We have comprehensively focused on this project, which is of strategic significance for both of the countries. Distinguished members of the press, Turkey has been fighting PKK, Daesh, the HKPC and FETÖ for many decades. These terrorist organizations have blood on their hands, and banning these terrorist organizations from undertaking activities and the freezing of the assets of the people associated with these terrorist organizations are of utmost priority for us, and we would like to profound our cooperation in doing so with our friends in the UK. On the occasion of my visit, it gives me great pleasure to be able to sign an agreement of intent between our Ministries of Home Affairs in cooperating in the field of security and intelligence sharing. At the same time, we are working on new security and intelligence-related collaborations. The agreement on the cultural centers and the relevant documents had already been signed, the negotiations of which between the two countries had already been concluded as a result of my official visit. Thus, we will be able to set an institutional framework for the Yunus Emre Turkish Cultural Center in London and the English Cultural Center in Turkey. And at the same time, we've had the opportunity to discuss at every length the latest developments in Syria, Iraq, Iran, the developments vis-à-vis the JCAP, and the developments in Palestine. We will never accept the moving of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. With this endeavor, the U.S. not only ignored the resolutions of the UN and the international law, but also refrained from playing the mediating role in the settlement of the dispute between two countries, and instead the US introduced itself as contributing to the conflict. The status quo had been guaranteed by the international conventions and the resolutions of the United Nations, and we have to do everything within our capability to refrain from distorting the picture. However, the unfortunate policies of the United States and the Israeli occupation and violent actions had been encouraged by the discretion of the United States. As of yesterday, 60 Palestinians have lost their lives, and many civilians in the region of 2,500 people have been wounded, most of them heavily. And these are all the results of such policies. And I would like to extend my condolences to the families of those who have lost their lives as a result of the incidents taking place in Palestine. And I wish an expeditious recovery to all those who have been injured. And I am condemning these actions in your presence. But I would like to underline one more fact. Going back to the year 1948, Palestine was settled on all of the lands currently occupied by Israel. And in the aftermath of the 1948 developments, Israel kept on assuming more and more land. So Palestine had been confined into a palmful of space on those lands. And as you can clearly see, Israel is the occupant of a vast land. This is unacceptable. I'm strong. That's why I have the right, is the mentality that we have to shy away from, and this is the mentality led by Israel in the region. And with these steps taken forward by Israel, in our point of view, is not right. And Israel is an occupant power and still raging terrorism. And frankly speaking, without any further ado, the international community and the United Nations should mobilize their capabilities in order to stop this oppression once and for all. At the General Assembly of the United Nations, as a result of the voting, previously, 128 countries rejected this decision of moving the embassy to Jerusalem, and 8 countries, the names of which you cannot remember in a blink, other than the United States and Israel, supported this decision. The resolution that was produced would actually prohibit such a decision from getting executed, but that had never been achieved because the U.S. claims to be powerful. But you are powerful, but you're not right. The history will not forgive you, and this is the fact that we will observe in the future. Israel will not be forgiven. That's what we're going to witness in the future too. So it all boils down to the fact of making a choice. Are we going to side with the strong or side with those who are right? That's why, as the term president of the OIC, Turkey has launched an appeal to all of the member states of the OIC to convene an extraordinary summit in Istanbul on Friday, on May the 18th. And with this extraordinary session of the OIC in Istanbul, we are going to communicate a very strong message for the rest of the world from the city of Istanbul. And I would like to once again thank Madam Prime Minister May for their generosity and for their kind and warm welcome. You were the most gracious host, and we're looking forward to having you in Turkey, Madam Prime Minister. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now take some questions from the press. Matt.
Thank you very much. President Erdogan, if I may, picking up on the theme of right and strong, you have elections coming up in June. How can you make sure that these elections are free and fair when you have detained and jailed more than 200 journalists, as well as tens of thousands of government officials, soldiers, policemen, teachers, professors? How can those elections be free and fair? And to you, Prime Minister, if I may, we hear today from the Home Secretary that 63 members of the Windrush generation have indeed been deported or removed from this country. We were previously told by you that no one had been deported. How did you get it so wrong, and why did it take so long to get it right?
Shall I respond to the question that was directed at me first of all? I believe the Home Secretary has indicated that up to that number. It was important, of course, that what the Home Office has done is looked very carefully across a period of time, and this was what was made clear at the time, to assess whether any such action had been taken in relation to anybody who was from the Windrush generation. As you will know, we've been very clear that the Windrush generation are British, they are part of us, they have a right to be here, and a number of steps have been taken, not only to set up the task force that is currently helping members of the Windrush generation who have not got documents to show their right to be here to obtain those documents. It will also be helping members of the Windrush generation who wish to take up that offer of citizenship that has been given. Of course, what the Home Office has also been doing is this process of looking back at cases to identify those where there may have been members of the Windrush generation affected in the way that you say. It was important to get that work, to do that work, to get that work right. But I reiterate what we have said consistently. The Windrush generation have a right to be here. They are British. They are part of us. And I think you see that reflected in the arrangements we have put in place to ensure that members of the Windrush generation have no doubt about their right to be here in the UK.
First and foremost, before anything else, the information that you are getting vis-à-vis the number of the journalists incarcerated are wrong. Your sources are not accurate, and you have to make a distinction between the terrorists and the journalists. We're talking about the burglars of the ATMs, those who have been caught red-handed bearing weapons, those who have been killing people. Are we supposed to call them as journalists just because they bear the credentials and identity cards? They're not free to do anything they want to do under the sun, are they? And currently, the Turkish judiciary is prosecuting and sentencing individuals who have been associated with terrorism and involved in terrorist actions. Please resort to the right source in order to get the accurate and healthy information so that you can produce healthy articles. We have experienced a similar question yesterday at the Chatham House, and I said exactly the same thing, and I think you haven't heard of my answer that I gave there. This is the essence of your question. The terrorists will not make good journalists.
President, would you like to invite a Turkish journalist to...
Türk. Efendim, Hasanay Sabah gazetesinden.
Hasanay from Sabah Daily. During your deliberations, we know that you'd also discussed cooperation for anti-terrorism. Now, as far as Turkey's fight against FETÖ and PKK, what concrete steps do you expect the UK to take?
Whether it be FETÖ, whether it be PKK, I have communicated the list of terrorists to Madam Prime Minister, and we have demanded the extradition of those terrorists associated with PKK and FETÖ. We have to accomplish these targets so that we can jointly keep fighting terrorism, or else what hurts me today will hurt the UK tomorrow. We have to come to terms with this fact, and we have to see this for what it is. And about this issue, we are very sensitive. We are highly sensitive. I can ask Madam Prime Minister the following question. Until so far, how many Daesh terrorists were neutralized or were killed? Do you have a number? I can give you a number. As Turkey, we have neutralized more than 3,000 Daesh terrorists in the city of Cerablus. And we are very resolute in our stance. However, FETÖ, some Western communities and some other organizations allege that Turkey is owning up to Daesh or feeding Daesh in a way. But we are fighting Daesh both inside the country and outside the country. However, this is the fact, but we keep on seeing wrong news and wrong coverages. We had submitted the list of terrorists to the Prime Minister, to Madam Prime Minister, our intelligence agency, the Ministries of Justice and the Home Affairs will keep on talking to one another. They will be in continuous communication, so that we will reciprocally share the names of the terrorists in order to profound and solidify our fight against terrorism and facilitate it. Thank you.
And just to say that from the UK's point of view, we take action where we have evidence of terrorist activity, of criminal activity, and I think you can see that in the action that has been taken against PKK here in the UK. I'll take another. Francis.
Prime Minister Francis Elliott from The Times. I'd just like you to expand a bit on what you agreed on foreign fighters, and does this effectively mean that you've given up on efforts to have them tried in Turkey? And perhaps President Erdogan, you could give an assessment of what risk you think foreign fighters are posing.
How many you think are from the news conference that's presently taking place at number 10, Prime Minister there hosting the President of Turkey, and that, Alistair Bunkle-Withers, our defence correspondent, not without criticism.
No, I think a lot of people will question the wisdom of hosting President Erdogan in here on such a high-profile visit as he has been over here for the last couple of days, because there are an awful lot of questions over Turkey's human rights record, the sort of authoritarian regime of the Erdogan government, the number of journalists in particular. I think around 150 was a figure I last read, that have been imprisoned since that attempted coup a couple of years ago in Turkey. I mean, Theresa May saying Britain stood by Turkey after that attempt on democracy, and President Erdogan reflecting that. But actually, I remember at the time, Britain and other NATO countries were very slow to come to the support of Turkey, and I don't think that went down very well with President Erdogan. And then you've also got what Turkey is up to on the Turkish-Syrian border as well, with Afrin and the Kurds down there. And you've got a very complicated relationship between the UK and Turkey at the moment. On the one hand, Britain does not see eye to eye with them on things like human rights and other security issues, hence why you see Turkey starting to drift towards, in some respects, Russia. President Erdogan and President Putin have got an increasingly close relationship ever since a Turkish jet was shot down by the Russians. They've restored a relationship, and they're getting closer and closer, much to the annoyance of people within NATO. And then at the same time, there are two very good reasons why Turkey is very important to the UK. Firstly, security, where it sits on that crossroads between Europe and Asia, but also on that Syrian border. It is a very important security ally when you're trying to defeat Islamic State, stop people in the past going from this country and Europe into Syria, but also returning. And secondly, when it comes to trade, and they spoke about it there, soon both countries will sit within Europe but outside of the EU, and so they will have that in common.
OK, for now, Alistair, thank you.
Well, a short time ago, Theresa May held a press conference with the Turkish President Erdogan. Matt Fry was there for us. Matt.
Well, Cathy, you won't hear any greater condemnation of Israel's actions in Gaza than from the Turkish president. He called the Israeli government an apartheid regime. He said that Prime Minister Netanyahu had blood on his hands. There would be a reckoning. They would regret their actions, and that if they wanted to learn about humanity, he tweeted this morning, then they should read the 10 Commandments and respect them. So he was giving the Israelis really quite a strong speech on humanity, which then led me to ask him this question in the press conference. You have elections coming up in June. How can you make sure that these elections are free and fair when you have detained and jailed more than 200 journalists, as well as tens of thousands of government officials, soldiers, policemen, teachers, professors? How can those elections be free and fair?
The information that you are getting in terms of the number of journalists imprisoned are wrong. Your sources are not accurate. And you have to make a distinction between the terrorists and the journalists. Those who have been caught red-handed bearing weapons, those who have been killing people, are we supposed to call them journalists just because they have those credentials?
And he fixed me with rather a cold stare, saying that terrorists make very bad journalists. Now, the irony of this meeting is that Theresa May, at the very beginning of this press conference, called the relationship between Ankara and London indispensable. Now, remember, just before the Brexit referendum, a couple of newspapers in this country, but also UKIP and Vote Leave, said that the prospect of Turkey joining the EU, which was really extremely remote at the time and still is remote now, would end up with tens of millions of Turks washing up into the European Union and indeed coming to Britain. That was simply wrong. It was another version of Project Fear, and some people say that this may have tipped the balance towards Brexit. And here we are in preparation for Brexit, Theresa May and President Erdogan forging an indispensable trade relationship for which the Turks will eventually want visa-free access for their citizens coming to the UK on a bilateral basis. Such is the irony of this particular meeting.
Thanks, Matt.